Thank you for joining. We're just waiting for the guest speaker to arrive. But thank you for joining. We really appreciate your time. There he is, Chris Norring.
Apologies, I was back to back on meetings here.
It's fine. It's only 3 minutes. It's okay.
Right. Hey, folks. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. Yeah. Seems like we have 17 people on the call. Excellent. And we're also recording, even better. And Claire, do you want to set some kind of intro, or do you want me to just start?
Uday already did it. We can do it again if you want. But I think we are good to kick off. You can breathe. You can take a glass of water.
I'd love to say a word or two, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Tony.
Let me just introduce everyone. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the Oxbridge-AIx Oxbridge AI Challenge workshop with Chris Norring, walking us through Azure. And we have a lot of the people from the Microsoft for Startup team here today. You're hearing Tony, who's going to be saying a few words, Anne Claire, who's been working very closely with us, and Chris, who's been with us since the beginning last year. So very excited for this session. Thank you all for making the time.
So just really quickly, hi everyone. Sorry, I had to take this from the car, but I wanted to just say welcome. I'm seeing some familiar names of folks that we spoke to. This is the first time that we're interacting with you all as a group. We're so excited about this partnership with Oxbridge. And we're really excited to be supporting student founders and founders that are coming from the academic environment, such as yourselves. The one thing that was important for us with this session is to make sure that what you're seeing, that we make it clear that this is all available to you. We provided Oxbridge a special offer for Level 2 and Founders Hub. So a lot of the tools that you'll be seeing are at your disposal. And if you have any questions on how to access anything after the session, then we can, of course, help with all of that. So just wanted to say that we're excited to have you with Microsoft for Startups and with Founders Hub. And if you haven't applied yet, we encourage you to do so. And with that, I will hand it over to Chris.
All right. Thank you, Tony. Let me just take control of the deck. Thanks for sharing that. I don't have to. Right. So this session is really a combination of things, because I'm aware that many of you are startup founders. Some of you are technical. Some of you are maybe not so much. And that's fantastic, because we need all kinds of technologies, right? Business and tech. And you can always ask a tech person about business and they're going to look like a question mark and so on. And that's great, as I said. But because of that, this is how I envision the overview of this session to be. So I wanted to talk about migrations to Azure, because I think many of you today are in a state probably where either you're running things on your local computer, maybe in a virtual machine, or maybe you even learned how to deploy in some kind of cloud, but not Azure. So I want to make sure that you have the guidance that you need to know what to do next. The other bit is, of course, once we are in a cloud solution, it's not obvious how you scale, because we must hope that all of you are going to get more customers and more usage. And because of that, it's good to know about how you scale various services, at which point it costs money, and also what things just scales automatically and it just works for you. And then we'll talk about a little bit about how to create your own MVP with Azure. I know some of you already have a running business, so you already have an MVP, but in some cases, maybe you have a napkin or at least some kind of Word doc that describes what you want to do and what you want to build. I want to make sure that you have the guidance that you need today to understand how to take that further. And lastly, we'll talk about how you can incorporate AI or artificial intelligence into your MVP to make it even a more compelling offer for your future customers or your existing customers. So that's roughly what today is. And we have a little bit less than an hour. There's really more slides in this deck than there is time to speak about it, but I'll make sure that we share the deck with you so you have all the insights that you need. Right, so let's first talk about migration, because this is where I think many of you might be. So you're either sitting at home with your local computer. I don't think many of you are sitting with your own data center yet, or maybe you're coming from a company where you have a data center, or you are in a position where you're already sitting in another cloud, but you want to move to Azure or maybe part of your cloud operation to Azure. So I want you to see these migration advices in that light, that a lot of these migrations are built for people already on-prem or on-premise, as we like to call it, which means that you have a number of data servers that you bought already. But the great news is for you as a startup, many of these advices are really the same, whether you're moving cross-cloud with your operation or you're taking your local set of computers that you've put a cord in between and move those to the cloud. It's the same thinking, the same ideas, the same tooling, and the same motions that you're going through. So one of the first things that we want you to do is to start to assess your workloads, which means that you may be having some resources locally. Maybe you got a machine learning module, or maybe you got a virtual machine, or maybe you're running some kind of database and you want to put that in the cloud. There are a few different things that you can do to assess and make a list, right? And then we want you to think about the business applications of all this, which essentially means you need to do your homework when it comes to selecting the best services, databases, and different choices in the cloud, so that you know exactly how much that's going to cost you, whether you have 1 customer, 10 customers, or 100 customers and beyond. So really take the time to make that business proposal, because it could also be valuable for people looking to invest in your business to see that you have this part covered as well. Because you might be in the, they might have signed some kind of contract with you on the promise that you will move to the cloud so that you can scale up your business. And then, of course, it's good to kind of assess to what degree you're ready to do a migration, because not all of you are. And as part of that is like, what I'm talking about is essentially to make a list to say, yeah, we can move the database, but we can't move the AI service. We can move this, but not that. And also a phenomenon here called right sizing. What right sizing means is that there are so many options in the cloud, how big, what features you need, how big storage, how powerful whatever service that you're using should be. But it's very easy to just, I want max on everything, and you end up with a very big cloud bill. We don't want that for you, which makes it super important to make sure that you have the number of GPUs that you want, you have the CPU, you have the memory, and you're only paying for features that you actually use. So part of right sizing is pick the right things for you. And then, of course, migration in waves. And I'm thinking you've seen this as startups already. Maybe you've started to adopt Azure Open AI, but you haven't moved anything else into the cloud. Part of that is already maybe running in AWS, or maybe it's running on your local machine. So think about how many steps you want to do this migration in. And then the last bit of this is security and compliance, because you might have something that security-wise works locally, or maybe in some other cloud provider, but what is that security solution in another cloud? And also compliance becomes a thing, especially if your customers are going to be maybe some government or maybe some bigger business. You need to show them that you are compliant, that you're following a set of routines that makes it your product eligible for them. So definitely keep security and compliance in mind. Now, this is probably a very important picture for many of you. Hands up, please, if you're already in a cloud other than Azure. So if you could just notify that with an icon. If you're not, that's fine. But this is a very nice slide, because this will show you what the corresponding service is called in each of the clouds. So I'm just saving you a Googling or a Bing, where you just look for, okay, I'm on AWS, which service do I actually pick on Azure? So here you can see, depending on whether you're using GCP, AWS, or Azure, what these services are called and what you should be identifying and read up more on next. So definitely keep this slide in mind. But as I said, we will hand out this slide deck as well, so that you know what to do. Now, as it comes to assessing your workload, there is a service that can help you with this. It's a free service. It's an Azure portal. It's called Azure Migrate. So you literally go into Azure portal, you type Azure Migrate, and you're able to discover various resources on infrastructure, on databases, on applications, how you can be assessing your workload. But something to consider, especially for big enterprise companies, is if you want to do an expert assessment. So this is something I usually tell bigger companies to do. If you're not sure that you're going to do this assessment right because you don't have the in-house knowledge, I would definitely look at this option. As a startup, and maybe as a startup that's grown a bit, this could also be a good idea. But if you're just very fresh as a startup, I wouldn't look at the expert option. Now, as I said, Azure Migrate lives within Azure Portal. It is a free service, and it can help you with various aspects of your migration process. So you can, it helps you discover and assess your existing, maybe on-prem resources or maybe other cloud resources that you have. And it covers a variety of things that we think you will need, such as databases, physical servers, or what have you. As you can see, there's quite a lot of features here. I'm not going to go into each and every one. But if we move on here, we see that right sizing is mentioned. And this is just me being very careful of your cloud expenditure. Don't spend more than you need. Find the optimal resources that you need. Make sure it contains only the settings that you're going to use, that it has the proper size so that you can also scale. And try to map out various dependencies that you will have between all of these cloud resources. And things that I mentioned before, try to take it easy with migration. There's no point in doing a big bang migration because that might be painful, but rather migrate 1 or 2 services at a time, make sure it works, make sure it's secured, locked down, and make sure it makes sense from a cost perspective. Because especially as a startup, you don't have an abundance of money. So definitely make sure that your cost is optimized throughout all of this. Now, again, here, if you go into Azure Portal, you type Azure Migrate, you have a central dashboard where you can keep track of your entire migration process. So there are various guides that you can find here, but you can also track your progress throughout this migration and plan it with this tool. And you can even test your resources before you decommission whatever assets you have in other clouds or on premise. And cost optimization is definitely a big thing that we're helping you with here via Azure Migrate. Right, so moving on, business proposal, that's one of those things that's really important when it comes to migration. And this is just you gathering all the possible information. This might not take a long while if you're running a startup, but if you're semi-big business, this might actually take a very long while to understand what cloud resources, what dependencies. As I said, a lot of this guidance is, it doesn't matter whether you're a Fortune 500 company or a startup, a lot of these guidance still apply to you as well. And yeah, I would just look in to see what do you want to have in the cloud. Do you understand the cost? Do you understand the cost over time, and so on and so forth? Apologies. So assessing readiness and right sizing, as I said, readiness is very important with your resources, whether you're using them in another cloud or they are on-prem. Right sizing, as I said, that is key if you care about performance. So you have the right resources, but it's also key when you look at it from a cost aspect, so you don't spend more than you planned. Now, before I move on, is there any other questions on this so far? Or maybe you can just type to me in the chat, and hopefully we have enough time to do some Q&A. But let's talk about scaling, because, you know, there are some certain things with scaling.
Excuse me,
yes,
Chris?
please.
Yeah, I do have a question.
Mhm.
So we are in the UAE and we've attempted to deploy on Azure a language model, and it's been impossible. So there's several of the machines that we need that are not available to us in the UAE. Is that something that the Azure Migrate program will be able to assist us with?
So that's usually a decision that the I would say the product teams are making, where it should be available, right? Because, you know, ultimately things run on a data center with physical servers. So I would you're all in Founders Hub, or many of you are about to become members of Founders Hub. So that's typically a situation, I would say, and Tony, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but this is something that you would usually raise a ticket for. And we also have an expert network of people that you could be talking to. But I would say ultimately this is a product team decision, and I don't think they're holding it back on purpose. It's more that they might not have the capability yet to be able to roll it out in your region. But I can totally understand how your data needs to live in your region, and you can't just select a neighboring region. So Tony, please feel free to chip in.
Yeah, we can, Adeniki, we can see that on offline as well, and see how we can help you with the support taking raising tickets to support you on that. Yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Right. Yeah. So I would definitely refer you quite often in Founders Hub to the ticket system, but also your expert network if you want to discuss different, strategies or approaches. So hopefully you feel like the support channels that you have as part of Founders Hub is helpful enough. And if it's not, then please feel free to reach out. Yeah. So the other bit of this is how can we best scale our business, right? And when I say scaling, it might not be obvious what I mean because we talk about different types of scaling on Azure. What we talk about is, for example, vertical scaling, and this means that the existing machines we have, we're able to upgrade them so they use more CPU, they use more memory, and this is just something we can do because we need whatever machines we're using to be more powerful. And then we got the horizontal scaling, which is essentially means that we're spinning up more machines. So, for example, if we have a Black Friday or some other type of sales, we're able to have more servers. This might be something that we do manually, but a lot of servers on Azure are quite automated in this aspect. So they might actually spin up the servers for you to meet demand and also scale them down as needed. Which brings me into my third point about scaling, which is auto scaling. So a lot of our application platforms, app service, for example, or Azure Functions, the underlying idea there is that it scales to meet demand, which means that we're going to spin up as many servers to serve 2 million customers or 200. So that's, in many cases, that's not something that you need to know about, but what is useful to know about is that there is vertical scaling if you want to beef up that machine. There is horizontal scaling, and in many cases, you don't need to care. But you do need to find out which is enabled for your service or selection of platform. Now, there are a few different services here that I think could be interesting for you all when it comes to scalability as this pertains to building an application. So for example, Azure App Service, that's our application platform. It's easy to think of this one as renting a hotel room because you're placing your app somewhere. It's an application platform. You never need to be concerned about patching it. You just bring your application to it and it said, I will run this for you. And then you got Azure Functions, which we'll talk more about later in this presentation. But the idea is to set up an event-driven architecture and code that only runs when you need it to. And I'm sure many of you have heard about Kubernetes so that you're able to do planetary kind of scaling if you need to run your next Facebook, for example. And then we have something that's interesting that I will also mention later in this lecture, which is Azure Logic App. And this is about workflow automation. And this is a great way to honestly host your entire business because you will have a lot of workflows and be able to map those out within the cloud could be really useful so you understand exactly where your data comes from, how it's being transformed, how it's serving your customers. And then you got something, Azure SQL Database. This is a option if you are running, for example, SQL databases. This can definitely be something that scales, but a lot of people are maybe thinking about Cosmos DB if they're looking at planetary scaling of a database. But and this is also mentioned as part here. So you see, you have a few different databases option. And we also run managed versions of Postgres and a lot of other popular databases. So hopefully you can find something that fits you and your needs and knowledge. Now, one thing that you need to consider, though, with scaling is that you need to understand how things are being used when it comes to your workload. So say, for example, that you have customers that everyone arrives at 7 a.m. in the morning and everyone goes away at 5 p.m. in the evening, then you could actually set that as a strategy and you pay less money because of it, and you're able to configure your scaling strategy to meet that kind of behavior. As you can see here on the right side of things, there are a few patterns that you can identify, and you just see, you learn from historical data from your users, or maybe you know that they will always behave in a certain way. And depending on which patterns you select, it might incur different costs. So just knowing that you can define a pattern is really the takeaway of this slide, I would say. Moving forward, any questions on the scaling bit before I move on? All right, so don't worry if you don't have time to think of your question, you can just post them in the chat as needed. But let's talk about how you could be creating your MVP with Azure, because that might be of interest to many of you. Maybe you started with some very simple MVP, but you realize this is not going to hold up because, hey, I need to build it in the cloud, it needs to scale and so on. Or maybe you only have a napkin with a fantastic $1 million idea. You can definitely use Azure to create your MVP. So let me present you with a set of considerations in general for building MVPs, but also see what tech I'm actually suggesting on Azure if you're building a straight up normal application. So MVP, as we all know, means minimum viable product. It's the smallest version of your product that delivers value to the users. And the focal point here is really on value. Whatever you're building, it should create inherent value for your users. It should therefore focus on essential features and functionality. And your goal should be to validate assumptions, to gather feedback and learn from a real world usage. It doesn't mean you need to build all the features, but features that matter, that pushes something forward. So there are things that you need to consider. One is customer empathy, of course, your hypotheses, your assumptions that you make. And you may or may not need to collaborate with various tech professionals, or maybe you have that knowledge inherently in your business already. Maybe you're considering in-house developers. Maybe you're considering outsourcing. That's what definitely a lot of startups are doing. And make sure that you identify the right type of users. And this might not be an easy play, right? Because, how do you know for your maybe niche app, or maybe your app is a really wide app that caters to a lot of people? How do you find these people? So how can you get some feedback from them, user feedback? How can you identify your target audience? And also there are various feedback methods. As you know, there are surveys, the user interviews, usability testings, all with their own pros and cons. So please have a strategy for why you're using these tools to make sure that you get the feedback that you need. Now, $1 million question here is, right, how do I know, Chris, what services to select on Azure for building an app? Well, it depends on what kind of app you're building, right? I can imagine that many of you have some kind of AI workload that you want to run, or maybe it's a straight up normal application, or maybe it's some kind of machine learning pipeline. Depending on what you're trying to build, the answer might differ a little bit. So let me answer you from an application standpoint. Where you have a normal consumer application, you would usually use something like Azure App Service to host your app. You'd use Azure Functions if you, for example, are trying to run what's known as serverless compute. You might be using something like Cosmos DB if you really need planetary scaling. It's good to be using other database options as well. But as I said before, Azure Logic Apps, that's drag and drop, no code, low code that you might have heard of. That could be highly useful if you want to map out your entire business and all the business flows. You might be using something like, honestly, Power Platform, which if all you're looking to do is quickly create an app in an hour, you want to put that in front of a user, that might be a very viable option, but also as you grow. And you also need to figure out how are you going to manage your company and your projects. And you might consider maybe Azure DevOps, or maybe GitHub, or some other service altogether. But know that many of these tools comes with integration with your services, so you can really have a good sense of control when you manage your projects. So how do you choose everything here? Well, I wish I'd made this font a little bit bigger here, but starting to see words with H, I think. But the point is that if you look at this slide, you see that there's a decision tree here, right? You see that, well, I'm looking to build something new. Maybe I want a virtual machine, or maybe I don't need full control, at which point I'm going towards an application platform like App Service or Azure Functions. So I would definitely go through this slide and ask yourself these questions and see where you end up with what services. Only you know what's the right answer for you, right? So definitely use this guide to understand how to choose what Azure service for your application. Azure App Service, I mentioned that name a few times, and on purpose I've taken a picture of a person standing in a hotel lobby, a concierge, because this is really how I kind of look at Azure App Service. It is an application platform, which means you never have to care about the whole web server or application server that's going to run your code. You just say, here's my application, now run it for me. I don't care if there are security patches, you fix it. I don't care if this platform is up or down, that's a you problem. So think of it really as you bringing your application code and just put it on the platform. This is also part of a paradigm called platform as a service. And yeah, you're able to develop rapidly. You can definitely use different environments. For example, if you want a staging environment or production environment, that's something that's supported by app service. You can integrate it because it's in Azure. You can integrate it with up to 600 different other services, and you pay for what you use essentially, right? Moving on, I definitely want you to consider something like Azure Functions. And why that could be a very viable option for you, especially as a startup, is that we often say that this scales with your business. And what we mean is that Azure Functions is part of an event-driven paradigm that will only run code when an important business event happens. And you define what that could be. But as, an example that I often use is when you get a new customer. So when you get a new customer, you want to run a piece of code. But if you don't get a new customer, why should you pay for cloud resources? And this is really where an event-driven paradigm where Azure Function come in. So you can say, well, I'm running code because HTTP request happened, or I'm running a code because of a timer elapsed, or I'm going to run a code because there was a queue here because I'm trying to sell football tickets, right? And yeah, this is the idea, the concepts I want you to know when it comes to Azure Functions is that one, it has a trigger, which is the reason why something should run, and two, you can bind it to various other sources in the cloud, which could be some kind of cloud resource. So you could easily say, well, because you did it HTTP request, I will now, because of an output binding, send an email or place a message on a queue or do all sorts of things. So our Azure Functions offer is really based on configuration overwriting a bunch of code. So definitely use those bindings to just say, well, if this happens, then run this code and write in this data source. So I want to take you through various scenarios so you have a sense of understanding when this comes into play, because it might not be obvious from everything I'm saying so far. When does this happen, Chris? Well, if you look at various scenarios, you see, for example, if you upload a file, and if you upload a file, what you want to do with that uploaded file is you want to go through it. Maybe you want to do some kind of validation checking. Maybe you want to add some meta tags. So this kind of capturing the whole process of what should happen if a file is uploaded. What we usually show is a person taking a photo. And when they take a photo and they upload that to storage, that photo is added with meta tags, and maybe it creates some kind of thumbnail from that photo, and maybe it inserts it into a gallery, and maybe it sends out an email. There's a lot of things that goes on just because you upload a photo. Now, another interesting case, I think, for you all, I think many of you are running AI machine learning type solutions, is you can definitely collaborate here, as you can see, with TensorFlow. And you can see that you might have a classification request coming in from a queue, and you have a series of Azure functions that now acts as workers, and they are able to work on these requests. And the end result is some kind of classification result. So imagine now that you have thousands of different functions doing your bidding. So all of these classification requests can go through really, really fast through the system. Or in the bottom right example here, you see how we, for example, are doing real-time stream and event processing. And you see how these streams comes in, a lot of events comes in through some kind of device, maybe an IoT device. And a lot of these things are being ingested, and maybe there's some processing that needs to happen, some transformation of the stream. Then you store it maybe in a Cosmos DB database, and you end up showing all of this on a dashboard. But the idea is that you set up this kind of system, and you only react when the IoT device is ready to push that data towards you. But if it's off, why should you pay for cloud, right? And the last example here at the bottom right is about scheduled task. And here you can see how something happens every 15 minutes because you decided that should be it. So you decided every 15 minutes you should go in to clean up a database because I know it's going to end up in some kind of dirty state because maybe there's a bunch of imports that's happening. So just try to take these examples. Think about, am I in such a situation? Would some, some of these architecture, would they work for me as maybe I'm importing a lot of data from a car vendor and I'm trying to, maybe I'm an analytics company wants to display this on a dashboard, and maybe I need to coordinate a lot of imports and so on and so forth. So this is really a great, interesting event paradigm that ensures that you're only spending as much as you want. Now, Azure Logic Apps, those are interesting because they are really drag and drop. And the idea is that this is low code and no code, and this could really benefit your business because it helps you create a workflow. So imagine any normal sized company, and I can just give you an example of companies that I worked at. They had most of their workflows offline. They weren't running it in the cloud, but they still had the same idea. So they were doing some kind of data import at the start of their day. They were transforming their data, and once it's been transformed, it was stored. And once it was stored, maybe some kind of email was sent out, and so on and so forth. There was a lot of custom and bespoke code written to do the transformations, to make sure that it acted the way it should. And that was really the core of the business. So once you had the imported data, once you had it transformed, then you could build web applications on top of it. Now, how this connects to Azure Logic Apps is that it has a lot of ready-made components for you already. So by using something like Logic Apps, you can just define your workflow. You can use something called connectors, and you can definitely use some kind of Boolean logic if you want, if and else like conditions. And as you can see here in this example, we're saying check travel time every weekday morning, get the route on travel time with traffic, create some variable, check for a condition, and based on if that condition is yes, then send an email, and if it's false, do something else. This is a really powerful way, as I said, to define your workflow as your business grows. So exactly like with Azure Functions, you start with defining a trigger. There's a reason why this workflow is running. And you define each step in this workflow, what it should be doing. You could, for example, listening to something on X or Twitter, and you can make sure that you pull down all these tweets. You can clean them, transform them, store that in the database. Maybe you show that as a trend diagram, whether your hashtag that you were using seems to be trending or not. So just imagine everything that you can build here. And you can definitely integrate Azure Functions as part of this, because even though you have many hundreds of connectors that does a lot of the work for you, you can still build your own custom bespoke connectors that wraps around an API, and they are usable within this low code environment. So this is really a system that will grow with you as you grow as a business. Any questions on these services before I move on to the next topic? All right, either it's super clear or it's 100% confusion. I don't know which it is, but I will definitely check the chat afterwards. So how do you then incorporate Azure AI to your tech MVP, right? So now say that you have selected all the application development platforms, you've carefully selected the databases, you've listened to Chris, you made sure that you're not using things that you don't need, so you're not paying for anything unnecessary. You've done the right fitting of your resources and everything else, but you just want to add that AI component to create that really compelling tech MVP. So how do you do it? Well, first off, you have different kind of services that I would like to discuss with you, so you can see what services would fit what scenario. And then I will show you these scenarios so that you have a really good idea. Now that we've talked about the services, let's talk about the scenarios. So I put them in context. And then lastly, if we have time, I'd like to show you some code examples so you just get a feeling of how much code do I actually need to write, Chris? How do I make this work? It depends on what you're trying to build, of course, but hopefully I'm able to get you to that point. Now, you have with Azure AI services, there are different ways that you can do to kind of manage it. And we're using something called Azure AI Studio, which is a combination of process tool and playground. So if you just want to try out your AI service before you integrate that in an app, you can definitely go into this playground. You can try out various prompts and upload your own data and so on, just to make sure that it does what it's supposed to before you integrate it into your programming code. It's definitely a really powerful environment for you to use. And there are a bunch of different models here, as you can see. We have something called Azure Open AI service. That's usually what we use. This is our hosted version of OpenAI LLMs. We have something called Azure AI Search that can definitely enhance your search experience, give you recommendations and so on. We'll dive into this one. And then you have content safety and content moderation. This could be super important for things that the user writes in the form of reviews or maybe images they upload. And then you have a translator. We have translator services from many different languages. We have AI speech that enables various speech recognition, synthesis. So think everything from recognizing specific voices to being able to identify certain keywords in a very noisy environment. So it's very versatile in that sense. And then you have AI vision, which is great. You might have your own machine learning models for learning to identify various components, but we do also have a lot of models that you can use right off the bat just to see if they work for you. And with that said, we have models that you can customize further by adding more training data as well. So before you even think the thought of bringing up and training image recognition, I would definitely have a look at our vision models, our vision services to see to what extent they are able to help you. I would look for a key name here called cognitive services. A lot of these services come in two flavors. They are either ready-made for you to use directly within translation, vision, and audio, or you can just take them where they are and train them further. I find that these work really well, but I do understand that many of you might have very specialized cases. It might not work anyway, but definitely have a look here. And yeah, as you can see, there's AI language services, there's document intelligence and so on. So quite a lot different areas where I definitely want you to have a look. Please evaluate this, see if it makes sense for you. Azure Open AI service, right? This is the Azure version of OpenAI, ChatGPT. This is our ChatGPT. And it comes with various different models for different use cases. So you got GPT-4, which is our latest. You got 3.5 Turbo that I think you use for conversation models. You got embeddings. This is something we use in the context of search because we want to translate text into something the machine learning model can understand, which is a vector. And all of these models together enables you to work with text generation, understanding what you're trying to say, process images, process audio, and so on. And then, of course, let's talk about use cases for OpenAI. Many of you know already what the use cases are. You have that as part of your business, but you can definitely create chatbots, create content, data grounding, definitely enhance chatbots. We don't want to see any more chatbots that's only responsive to keywords, right? Or even regular expression patterns, but chatbots where you're able to use your natural language. And as you all know by now, I think many of you have probably used ChatGPT for 1 or 2 years. We can definitely use it to create high quality text, do summaries, and find interesting insights in very long pieces of text. And you can definitely use it for data grounding as well. Now, when it comes to pricing, one of the most important things that you need to know about is that you can either use something called PTUs or tokens. So what we mean by this pay-as-you-go model is that you see a lot of listing on prices. So you see how it costs you per token usage, and you see how there's different pricing per model, and different models have different capabilities. So that's why they have a different pricing. And you can also see how we use something called provisioned throughput unit. And this is just another idea to be built, essentially. The idea is that it allows you to specify the exact amount of throughput you need, because sometimes you need a big throughput, so you might want to be billed by that instead. So definitely read up on the pricing, because sometimes with AI, it can be quite costly if you suddenly have 1,000 customers, if you yesterday had 5. So definitely keep track of your cloud bills. We want you to win. Some important models that might be good to know about that I hope you have some idea about already. GPT-4 and GPT Turbo. These are the most cutting edge models we have right now. We also have GPT 3.5 Turbo, which we used for chat. So if you are interested in doing a chat-like conversation with AI, this is your bet. And embeddings, as I said before, this is when you want things to be searchable. So you need to run a lot of embedding calls on things that you want to be able to search. So say it's customer data, you need to run a lot of embeddings calls on the customer data, turn that into vectors, into something, so that when the customer comes searching for the data, you're able to present the search results they need. And I'm thinking also many of you have heard of DALL-E already. This is how you generate various images. And we definitely support the latest generation, but I'm told that it's not supported widely yet. It works in certain areas. I think Sweden was one of them. So what you'd need to do is deploy your DALL-E resource in supported regions to have the latest version of DALL-E, but we definitely support for DALL-E 2 in most regions. And then you got Whisper, who helps you with transcribing and translating speech. And we also have text-to-speech that's currently in preview. With that, I hope you have a kind of understanding of some important models. Right. So if we look at Azure AI Search, this is a different service that you use for different things. And the idea is that you kind of use it for any kind of search out there. And there's also an architecture diagram. So the idea is that AI search works first with some kind of ingestion process, which means it sucks in all the data, then it creates search indexes, and then it expects you to pose a query as an end user, and it's able to show you the relevant results. So just think of this in two parts. One is sucking in all the data, creating all the relevant search indexes, depending on how someone wants to search about something, and then comes the user query. But the good part here is that Azure AI Search does all the things. And I'm thinking also that you should compare this to Llama Index and similar frameworks out there, but knowing that all of them needs to also think about storage, for example, whereas AI Search is more of a complete solution. Let's talk about use cases, right? It might not be easy for you to think about, Chris, where do I actually apply this to my tech MVP? I'm sure you got ideas already, but please help me to inspire you a little bit. So for example, you could have a generative AI search. A lot of sites out there, maybe pharmacy sites, maybe you go to somewhere for apartment search. Those are very manual, right? You've noticed how you use drop downs and radio buttons to search, and it feels so, you just want to use some kind of natural language or ChatGPT like. So just imagine that you are creating the next property search site. That's really what you could be creating with generative AI search, right? Imagine that people can search on their own customer data. Imagine that your next apartment, you find it through a perfectly crafted prompt where you said, I want to live close to a park. It should be a daycare center. I can only pay this much. The commute should be this long. And you haven't touched a single drop down or radio button, but you get presented exactly with what you need. Another bit is a workplace search. Like, for example, Microsoft is a very big company. We have a lot of files everywhere. And I think that's why we are probably patient zero when it comes to a lot of these AI tools, because we're able to find our files wherever they live on Microsoft. And I'm sure a lot of other big customers are also very grateful because we're able to build these co-pilots. But that's definitely something that's realized thanks to a service like this. And then you have software as a service search. So just imagine that you are building this for someone else. Maybe that's your startup. So anyone can bring their customer data and you make it instantly searchable. I could definitely create a startup based on that. Or imagine that you're doing some kind of website search. As I was saying, this could be e-commerce, this could be property search, could be pharmacy, could be medical advice, and just helping people to quickly locate the information they need and the products that they're looking to buy. And yeah, there are a lot of features here that makes development simplified. You're able to list results that make sense. There are different types of search, but semantic search is one of them. And you're able to knowledge mine. And there are a lot of capabilities that you could be working with when it comes to customization. So key phrase detection, language detection, OCR. So you see there's different modalities as well. Moving on, conscious of the time here. But yes, it's good to know some kind of comparison landscape, right? Because when you look at search services, it's important to know that we also have Microsoft Search, there's Bing, there's database search, and there's also a dedicated search solution. And so you can see how these line up towards AI search. So you can see, for example, that Azure AI Search pulls in content across Azure and any JSON dataset. But you see that Microsoft Search is kind of focused on 365 content rather. So definitely use this comparison table to say, do I need AI search, or could I be using some kind of existing solution already? Or maybe you want to search a database, then it makes more sense maybe to use that capability within Azure Cosmos DB than to build your own version here. So make sure that you read through this table to understand if you're using search, use the right service. And this is hopefully where I hope to inspire you the most, because now we'll talk about various startup scenarios and recommended AI tech for each of these. So here, imagine that you are a startup, and I'm sure many of you have decided the ideas for your startup already. But if you haven't, or you're thinking about pivoting, imagine that you are building some kind of software as a service platform. People just come to you, they log in, they use your system, and what you want to do is to maybe help them, or you want to sell features, some kind of features or additional services to paying customers. So you will improve that service by adding Open AI to it, which enables you to have chatbots, to have natural language understanding, and your customers have a fantastic time because they don't need to go to a very stiff-looking FAQ page or work with keywords, but they can express themselves in the way that they want, and they are able to get personalized recommendations therefore. So this could really be any kind of SaaS platform, but just imagine how much better that customer experience will be like. Or imagine that you are having some kind of content platform, that you are able to host articles, videos, and so on for free. And maybe you make money through advertisements, but you can definitely use a service here like Azure AI Content Safety to moderate and to filter content. So just imagine all the world's content. Some people will abuse that. So definitely use our moderation mechanisms for that. Or imagine this, you are either building this solution for someone else, or this is your core business within HR, human relations, and you're able to create tools for employee well-being, engagement, and productivity. And you're able to partner with companies to offer your service and employee benefits. And this is where you want to use Azure AI Language Service for sentiment analysis and personalized recommendation. So now you see how that could, what kind of service would fit in that business enterprise. Then you might have another service for e-commerce. This is usually a very common case for us when we're out there on the conferences speaking. E-commerce, imagine that you build a platform connecting buyers and sellers, that you charge a commission based on transactions, and you leverage, therefore, some kind of Azure AI search for semantic search and for product recommendations. So here you see how our search capability helps us build a better business. Now, moving on, you might have some kind of real estate firm that you're creating. So you want to cut out intermediaries. You don't want to deal directly with real estate agents, but you instead want to build a platform for property buyers and sellers. And you can definitely use AI vision because it's able to quantify what's on a photo. It's able to describe that photo and create a better service because of it. So thanks to that, a lot of intermediaries are no longer needed because you're using AI in a very smart way. And I see we have some questions coming in here. So let me see if I can switch to the chat here. Let's see here quickly. For Azure Logic, no low code for MVP, does this cover UI design? Well, that's an interesting one, right? Because it depends on what you're trying to build. Because if you're using Logic apps, you usually have a back office workflow that you're trying to map out. If you want to build something that the user will see, I would actually look at something called Power Platform. And that's also not a low-code solution. But the good part is that whatever connectors you build in Logic apps will be available in Power Platform because they're using the same underlying technology. But what Power Platform is that it enables you to build an app in 2 seconds because you can use either our sample apps or you can just with prompts create those apps. So I would definitely look into Power Platform for UI design, either with our design or you can just create your own bespoke design on top of those apps. So it looks like you made them from scratch. And here it says, if we're interested in creating a chatbot for support and knowledge access, do we need to train the model in any way? This is interesting, right? I would say that this is a very typical RAG case, retrieval augmented generation, where you have a chatbot, you're able to use natural language, and you have some kind of data source that you want to pull into. Generally, when you want LLM type conversation-like capabilities, it's very expensive to train an LLM. So that's why I'm saying a RAG solution that pulls in data from data resource. So here you can, for example, point it to a FAQ page. You can definitely build that using one of our frameworks and implement a RAG type of solution. So hopefully that was an answer to your question that don't train your model on this if you wanted to have LLM capabilities, because that's going to be super expensive unless you have a very specific niche case. But use RAG, and what I'm saying when I'm saying RAG, what I'm saying is, imagine you have the user prompt, and as you recognize what the user wants, you're able to pull in various resources. So you augment that prompt, and that complete prompt is what's being sent to the LLM, and the LLM is going to be able to answer you. So that's really, in short, how RAG works. But right, moving on. So how do you technically build AI? And this is maybe what some of you might want to know, or maybe it's too technical, I don't know. But I just wanted to shortly present this so you have a sense of how hard is it. And my answer is not that hard, hopefully, if you are somewhat savvy when it comes to application development. What I'm saying is it's usually an API call. So for example, this is what you need to do to talk to an LLM. In this case, it's talking against Azure Open AI. You are providing it with a prompt. You are specifying a deployment name. This is something, a friendly name that you mentioned on Azure. You are then calling the LLM and you get a response back. This is how simple it could be to talk to an LLM if all you wanted was that simple conversation. Moving on. I don't think we have time for a text demo, but we will definitely have access to these slides, so you can just click through these demos in your own time and see how that works. In image generation apps, it's the same idea as a text generation app. You specify a prompt, you are able to send that prompt into an image generator, and out comes a URL, and you need to download that URL, and then you can present it. So you either store that generated image in a database and then show the user, or you show them that directly. So this is a fairly simple Python script that does just that. Specify the prompt, send in the prompt, get the image, download the image. And I don't think we have time for that demo either, but definitely have a look at that after this. Chat applications are a bit different because they provide you with a previous conversation. So you're able to set some kind of early context that, you know what, we've had this conversation already. Here are all the messages where we talked about what to buy for dinner. And because you're able to set that context, you're able to get a more intelligent response. So you can just fake the fact that you had a conversation before by saying that you're of role type system, or you're of role type user, that's you, that's a user's prompt. And you just set that appropriate context, and you're able to get some kind of response back that makes more sense than just having that first conversation. Right, and then you got search applications, which I think many of you might be interested in. And the idea here is to just say, what's the conceptual landscape like? What do you need to know really? Some of you might be AI experts, so you know all the things about it, but for us who are application developers or business deciders, we just need a rough understanding. And what we need to understand is that you start here on the right side here with the search. So you have your search application, you have your data, you got some other data, and all of that data should be searchable, right? And to make it something searchable in text, what you need to do is you need to transfer the data that you own into a vector representation that you see here at the bottom left. So everything in green here, this is you taking a normal looking text, turning that into vectors. Once you have them into vectors, you are then able to do a comparison. So if you look at the very bottom right image here, we are doing something called cosine similarity. What this means is that now with that we converted the user's prompt and all the text information that should be searchable into vectors, all of these will be represented in a physical space. And guess what? All the vectors you're looking at, the degree difference between these vectors is how similar they are. So if you check A and B, you see the degree difference is very small, which means that someone likely said pony and horse, whereas A and D are far apart. So this is probably horse and car, right? They might be something that takes you forward, but they don't feel that related. So this is really what you need to know, is that when you do a search, You can use cosine similarity to see how things are related and just know underneath that it's comparing vectors. There are different types of searches though, and I don't think it's within the scope of this presentation, but I think there are 4 or 5 very used methods for different types of search that, depending on what you're after, answers a bit differently. But know this, turn things into vectors, then you can compare, then you can present the end result to the end user. And this is just an example showing you transcription from a YouTube video. And one of the things that you need to understand, and this is something that most frameworks does for you, is how do I take my 100 PDFs and turn that into searchable content? Well, you need to find a way to slice that. So think that you have an A4 paper, a white paper, and you try to strip this up into smaller strips of paper. That's how the whole chunking process happens. It just finds a way to say, this sentence should be searchable, and this, and this, and this. But there are a lot of functions that does this for you. But I just want to place that mental image in your head of you tearing up a paper. And then each and every one of these strips of paper are going to be embedded, turned into vectors. And then it creates a search index from that. And that's what you're searching. I don't think we have time for that demo, and conscious of the time. Tokens matter. I want to say that as one of the end things I'm saying here today, because it matters how much you pay for things, right? Knowing what the token is going to be key for you to manage your costs. So a token varies a bit based on the model and based on what language is being used, but the token is usually 4 characters. But it depends on the language, as I said, and the model. And you are in many cases paying for tokens. So just be aware that tokens are used as you devise your prompt, but also on the output when you say how many tokens should be used to produce the output. So just know that, whatever you use when it comes to OpenAI, it starts costing money after a while. And shortly here also, before I wrap things up, there are some best practices here. For you to have a varied response, there is a temperature variable that you should set between 0 and 1. 0 is very predictable. 1 is maximum variation. And please calculate your token usage so you can keep track of your budget. Even set up budget alerts within Azure, because that will save you. And select the model that fits your task. Sometimes you can actually make do with a model that's not GPT-4, but something worse, because it's good. So in summary, we talked about Azure migration. So you have a sense, please go in and use Azure Migrate. Scaling with Azure, we had different scaling methods, vertical, horizontal, but also auto scaling. In many, many cases, auto scaling is already enabled for your services. So just read up on that. But now you know that there are different types of scaling. Hopefully I've inspired you all today with various startup scenarios and which service would make sense for what scenarios. And I've also presented you with a table guide in the very beginning of this presentation, where you could see what is the service called on GCP, on Azure, on AWS. And I also showed you here how you could be leveraging AI on Azure. And in many cases, just using the LLM is no more than 4 or 5 lines of code, as you saw, to get what you need. And you can really, really improve the experience for the end user. And this is a slide I want you to check. Azure pricing, it has a pricing calculator. How to migrate to Azure, here's more resources. Read more on Azure AI, there's definitely a good starter point. Founders Hub, I know some of you are in Founders Hub already, and you know that there are different levels where you unlock various amounts of credits. But for those of you who are not in Founders Hub today, it's a really compelling offer, because we will ultimately be able to, if you take you to level 4, you will have access to as much as $150,000. We want to be there for you throughout your entire journey, from napkin to tech MVP to growing your business. Many of you have been with us for 6+ years, so it's a fantastic platform to be part of. You have expertise, you have ticket system, and you have all some really great people on this call that will help guide you through this process as you grow, and we want you to win. That's why we're doing these kind of calls. Anything you want to add, Anne-Claire, on these slides?
Thank you, Chris. No, I think you have well summarized it. So if you are part of the program, again, as Chris mentioned, you have technical support and Azure support. It's pretty easy on the platform. You request on the guidance section what it is that you want to talk about specific to Azure, and you can get started, migrate, having an architecture review. And also we have an amazing expert network made of Microsoft employees like Chris, Tony and myself, and you can talk to us for technical and business questions as well. And yeah, thank you. Uday, something you want to add? I put a little feedback form. If you can fill it in, that would be much appreciated for Chris content, as well as for us moving forward to help you.
Cool. I just want to say thank you so much to Chris and Claire, Tony, and the rest of the team for today. This was really useful. I've been writing a lot of notes. So then thank you. And looking forward to our next workshop next week on Monday.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate your time, and hopefully it was useful today. But as I said, we can definitely hand out these slides so you can check the demos we didn't see today in your own time. And please feel free to reach out, definitely ping Uday, but also fill in our questionnaire so we can always improve, make sure that we can deliver the knowledge that makes the most sense to you. So a huge thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. It was a good session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot,
Chris.
Chris.
Thank you so much.